If you think about it, the most popular phones are of two kinds. Ones that change stuff and then the rest that adapt to that change. The OnePlus 6 for the most part adapts to the change, but it does it really well for the most part. Let's start with the design because that's probably the most evolved part. I personally think that the little things make the biggest of differences. Basically what I'm trying to say is that the buttons are finally satisfyingly tactile, which if you know is huge for me. But having a glass build has its own pros and cons. So firstly, because it's glass and not metal, it did not feel uncomfortably cold in the mornings, which is something that I have really started to appreciate now. Secondly, it's the most reflective phone that I've seen in a long while, maybe ever. So every time I tilt the phone, my camera autofocuses on what's being reflected on the glass instead of the actual glass. It's that reflective. Thirdly, the glass is smooth and nice to hold in hand. In fact, really smooth and really nice to hold in hand when naked, which is sort of a weird thing to say, but it just feels substantial and complete even though the phone is just really sleek. Although it does not matter because it's a big fingerprint magnet, very slippery and very fragile, so you inevitably would need a case for this. And OnePlus knows this, so they have actually provided a case within the box, and it's a decent one considering the fact that it ships with the phone. But then it cannot compete with cases from independent case manufacturers like say Rhinoshield, which are perhaps the best cases you'll find for the 6. I actually happen to use them, so I've got both the cases that they make for this phone. One is a solid suitcase which covers the entire phone and is built really well. It's really robust, really protective, yet very light in weight and not bulky. It's also got a lay-on table design, so it does not let the camera bump or the front of the phone to scratch up, which is pretty cool. The second one is a bumper case that goes all around the frame and lets the rear of the phone shine through it. And just like the solid suit, it's also got a lay-on table design, so it does not let you scratch the front or the rear of the phone. And by the way, both the bumper and the solid suit cases even protect the alert slider with a slider built into the case. So the attention to detail is pretty incredible. Basically, these are the essential accessories that you would not want to use the 6 without because it's just so fragile. Oh, and as a bonus, you can avail 20% discount during checkout if you use the code JUSTTECH. This will be valid for 2 weeks from the date of uploading this video. After that, it will be 10%. So you know what to do. I'll leave this linked below. But coming back to the design, the buttons, as I said, are finally really tactile. The alert slider has shifted to the right side. The speaker has gotten really tinny, like the way I'm sounding right now. The fingerprint sensor has shrunken down and I actually tap on the flash a lot of times instead of the sensor. So a lot has changed. Although I personally think they could have done at least something differently, like maybe having red buttons across the board or maybe red ports, which would have gone really well with the black phone. Just the little things, you know. But the only thing that has remained the same, apart from the survival of the headphone jack, is the size. So it's still a big two-handed phone, just like the 5T, just like the 5, just like a typical OnePlus. The big change is with the display, especially when you compare it with the pre-5T devices. In fact, it's probably the biggest one in terms of the user experience. What really makes the difference, I guess, is the new aspect ratio, because that's probably the only thing that's changed, since its resolution, the pixels per inch, all of that stuff is still pretty much the same. But because it reaches to the edges of the frame now, it makes it much more immersive and attractive. But then it gets penetrated with a notch. At least that's what it seems like. Well, firstly, the notch is pretty tiny, and in fact so is the chin and surrounding bezels, which actually adds to the user experience. Although even though the notch is tiny, I don't think they were really incapable of getting completely rid of it, which really proves my point that they adapt to the change. But they have actually handled the notch in a clever way. Firstly, it by default comes with what I call a no intrusion mode, so it does not interfere with any app that you open. Basically, when you open an app, the area surrounding the notch matches the color with that of the app, which camouflages the notch, especially when the color is black. When the color is not black, it still does not matter since it's not intruding into what's being displayed. If you're playing a game in the default mode, it behaves much like an 18:9 display, kinda like one on the 5T. Although you can go full screen too and use each and every pixel for all of your apps, that is if you're okay with the notch. If you're not, you can completely hide the notch in the settings, which again makes it look like a 5T, which is boring to me, but I have to say the way the software has been molded to make the notch not feel like an interference, it's really impressive. But the entire software experience was not rainbows and sunshine. So the unit that I got to spend a lot of time with was of a friend. So after I was done testing and I returned the phone, it got a software update, obviously. So it was 5.1.8 and the guy updated it and it just ruined the software experience. Basically, the apps, even basic apps, started running on really low frame rates. It was really laggy. The battery life reduced drastically. The standby time became really poor. At one point, it was basically not usable. So he actually went to a not so nearby service center and convinced the employees over there to downgrade it back to 5.1.5, back to the smoothness. Now, if you Google this, you'll realize that this is not an exclusive experience. A lot of people have actually reported such issues on OnePlus forums, but there's still a high chance that some of you have slided into the comment section and are probably writing something along the lines of, I have never experienced any of this, you mother, which is totally fine because not a lot of people experience this, but the person who got me this phone experienced this. So I really think OnePlus needs to get their stuff sorted. The other thing that I noticed was that I didn't notice any major exclusive features for the OnePlus 6 in the software department. There are gestures, but even the 5T got them via an OTA, which is actually great, but to be honest, I'm not really a big fan of those gestures. So although they mimic the ones on the iPhone, the experience is just not at that level. Like swiping up from the bottom right or left to go back just does not feel natural. Similarly, swiping and holding on the screen to get to all the used apps is also not natural at all. You swipe up from the bottom, but the app trays emerge from the center. Makes little to no sense to me. Maybe it's because they are not as smooth as the ones on the iPhone, or maybe it's just me. Also, now you cannot swipe on the fingerprint sensor to bring down the notification panel. I don't know why would OnePlus do that, so that's gone too. But all the other stuff about the software mostly remains the same. The same pure Android feel, the same smoothness, the same ridiculously fast face unlock, basically the same deal. The cameras, however, have been slightly updated. Firstly, it seems like they protrude slightly less now, but they still do. Rhino Shield case is linked below. Secondly, the sensor size is a tiny bit bigger, and now you can also record 4K in 60 FPS, which is cool, but for 5 minutes. It can also shoot some 120 FPS footage in 1080p, and it looks amazing on the phone, but not so much on the computer. Rest of the stuff is still pretty much the same, like the app. One thing to note is since there is no telephoto lens, when you press 1x to go to 2x, unlike the OnePlus 5, you are digitally zooming in instead of optically zooming in, which basically means that you're cropping into that image via the software instead of using a lens that has a higher focal length. Also, just like the last time, you can change the aspect ratio to that of the display, and I highly recommend doing that. You still have the manual mode, you can still shoot in RAW. In fact, even the images look like the ones they have been from the 5T or even the 5. And that's really where the majority of the price cut shows. I mean, at least to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but if you look at it in a broad perspective, over the past couple of years, we've been seeing that it's pretty possible to put in the best processor, the fastest amount of RAM, the maximum amount of RAM, the fastest storage, basically a flagship spec sheet in a comparatively low price tag phone. But it's really the cameras that sees minimal upgrades in these types of smartphones, which is not bad, at least not to me, because I'm not a big camera user, but a lot of people buy their smartphones based on how good its camera is. The images from the OnePlus 6 look really good though. They have the same strengths as last year, like the best dynamic range in the business, and also the same weaknesses as last year, like issues with portrait mode and less light. But that doesn't mean it's a bad camera. I mean, you could probably run a food-based Instagram handle off of this. But I really think that the improvements made on the video front are more exciting and impressive than the ones made on the photography front. So maybe open up a food-based YouTube channel. But that's the OnePlus 6. Practically, it's the best phone you can buy because of just how simple, clean, and to the point it is, and also because of its really practical price tag. But you can't expect anything strikingly different about it except for the way it looks and dash charge. It even has the same amount of battery life as the 5T, which is 5 to 6 hours of screen on time, which is not bad, but I'm just saying it could be improved. So with the OnePlus 6, you're not getting any fancy features like wireless charging or a high-end DAC. You will get a really speedy, a really relevant, and a really future-proof smartphone. And I would highly recommend that. As well as Rhino Shield cases. Talk to you next.